Hey guys, everyone. Hey, everyone. Happy Wednesday. How are you guys today? All good? We are slowly going live. Hello. Hey. Hey, what's up? How is everyone? I just hit the record button just so everyone can get ready and we can prepare to go live with Siadhal from Metaview. We are going to talk about productivity in recruiting, productivity in hiring. So that's going to be awesome, great fun. Siadhal just joined us. Hey, how's it going?
Really good, Michael. How are you doing?
Awesome. Welcome. So we will wait a while for people to connect. The number that we can see here on the top left doesn't really reflect everyone who is connecting because the number is not pulling people from LinkedIn. But that's okay because here in the chat we will see the comments and everything. So I'll be featuring some of the comments and questions. The first one is from Michal Geborski, who says, hi, everyone. Hi, Siadhal. Looking forward to today. Awesome. Good. Cool. So we will slowly kick it off. Siadhal, you have lots of experience from the recruiting space. You've been very active also in the community. You are also responsible for this awesome tool that we are going to mention here and there, probably at the end, because it's related to productivity, right? But before we kick it off, and also while some people are still connecting, why don't we kind of start with just quick intro. People may also know you from LinkedIn, but people who are kind of new to the recruiting space, why don't you tell a bit more about yourself? Like where are you coming from? What's your background? And why are we even here today talking about productivity in recruiting?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks again, Michael, for having me on. So Siadhal, I'm the co-founder and CEO at a company called Metaview. Metaview are building the AI assistant for your hiring conversations. So we can talk more about that later. But essentially, my background is really came at this general problem of, hey, how can we do better? How can we elevate how we hire as a hiring manager? I was not a recruiter by trade. I was a hiring manager at Uber at a time when it was growing incredibly fast, working very closely with recruiters on hires. And from my sort of seat in that, my perspective as a hiring manager, as far as I was concerned, hiring was interviewing. That was how we got to know candidates. That was what we made our decisions based on. And it just felt incredibly, frankly, unreliable and opaque. Unreliable in that we'd often get to the end of a process and, not be sure about what decision to make and having to rely on other people's opinions, even if they couldn't substantiate them very well. But, did you want to go through the effort of having a conflict or sort of like a debate about that or not? All of these sort of things that have nothing to do with hiring the best people. And then opaque from a perspective of, it was very hard to know what to do to improve things. We would try and set up training and all of these things, but we didn't really know what people were talking about in these really vital conversations. So that was a starting point for starting Metaview, which is all about helping people elevate the quality of their interview process in a way that's like super convenient too. But really started, learned the hard way, I guess, what I didn't know about recruiting. Been building the company for over 5 years now, and it's really in the last 18 months that it's taken off. Feel like I've been in the recruiting industry for a long time because I have been, but before that I was more on the hiring manager side of things.
Awesome. And we are going to talk about AI and how it is impacting recruiting and hiring as such. And lots of people also within our community at the Tech Recruitment Academy and people who are listening also to us on YouTube as we are streaming there, they may wonder how AI is impacting us, what's the future of recruiting as such. So these are the topics that we are going to cover today. But also you guys who are watching this on YouTube or LinkedIn, feel free to write comments in the chat and we will highlight them. This is the huge advantage of joining us live so that you can also ask questions. But okay, cool. One of the questions that people may have on top of their mind is like, what's going on? People may be kind of stressed with the AI kind of taking over parts of the recruiting jobs. So how, based on your now insight and of the market, how is the market changing? Like, what do you see happening And especially if you could compare, for example, the agency versus internal HR, like what's going on? What can people expect going forward?
You mean in the context of AI's impact, or
Yeah.
probably how I'm best placed to. Yeah. Honestly, I think the impact. I think we're at the foot of the hill. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't think a ton has changed. I spend a lot of time attending conferences, or just generally speaking to folks who, some who are customers and some who aren't. And I'm shocked at the extent to which it's glossed over. What are people actually doing with AI today that's affecting their workflow? And even at some amazing companies, it's very little, and that's both on the agency side and on the in-house side. I do think that, sort of, much as I'm a deep believer that AI is really going to be revolutionary for how we work, I still think there's a lot of, toys that people play with. And then but relatively few things that actually impact how people do work. Obviously, I believe Metaview is one of the things that does the latter, but obviously most people aren't using the product yet, although we hope to change that. So I don't think that the change has been massive. I think what I'm starting to sort of pick up now is that people are getting a little bit more sophisticated about the parts of their business where it makes sense to explore AI as like a new capability as possible, versus, hey, I've already got this thing automated, but now it can be a little bit better and smarter because I can apply AI to it, and that's just baked into the thing I already had. So I think that stuff, the second stuff, is not as interesting. People will probably just be seeing that in their day-to-day, the tools they're already using will say, hey, now this is powered by AI or something, but they're not game changers. The stuff that I think, the thing that people are realizing is maybe now are getting more sophisticated around, is moving away from using ChatGPT just to sort of generate a job description or a set of questions or whatever it might be, which is obviously an incredibly intelligent piece of software, but it doesn't have any of your business data in it. So it's very hard for it to be contextual to what you might actually need. And now people are starting to think of, what are the systems I can use that are aware of my business data so that they can actually make better suggestions for me. And when you start to think about making an AI sort of aware or have the context of your business, you then start to think, well, what's the most valuable context? Is it the stuff I already have, like what's already in my CRM? If I gave an AI everything that was in my CRM, my candidate CRM, or even my ATS, if you're in-house, would that be able to? How could that help me? Or are there other sources of data that actually make it even smarter? And I think the biggest change is going to come, and obviously this sort of have talked about this a lot with agency leaders and internal talent leaders. I think the biggest change is going to come about the new sources of data people can start to actually use because AI is so powerful. The most obvious one for us is conversations. Again, my perspective is interviewing is where the most important information in your hiring process is. We've done very little with that data up till now because it's too dense and it was too hard to capture. Those things have changed, which means there's a bunch of new capabilities now. And I think people are starting to switch onto that and really think about these new veins of data that they can make use of. And just to be clear, Michael, I don't mean make use of the data and, build a spreadsheet and then analyze this data to come out with some learnings. I just mean by exposing the raw data to the right AI, you can start to do things that you could never do before.
And that's actually really interesting because a lot of recruiters use either the resume of a candidate. It could be also a LinkedIn profile, or the data from tools like Contact Out or Apollo or Lucia, the emails and phone numbers, and that's pretty much it, right? But with a tool like Metaview, we can actually add additional set of data to the equation, which would be everything that a candidate says during the half an hour long interview, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, that's really awesome. So coming back to how AI is impacting the recruiting world, like do you see now let's say on one end, do you see recruiters using tools for very specific use cases? So for example, there is a tool that helps to create better, thumbnails on YouTube, or maybe a tool that enables recruiters to adjust a job description, or ChatGPT that enables them to, come up with better, whatever, one paragraph text. Or on the other side, do you expect an AI to take over a larger part of the day, if we can say so, of a recruiter? Is there any part that can be taken over completely, not just these minor legal tasks?
Excellent question. I think, let me answer in like a slightly different way that I still think like covers some of the ground. So I think there are, I guess one way to sort of like think about the impact of this is, much as I can't sort of like draw out, hey, all of this stuff is definitely going to go away and this particular stuff is going to stay, and you'll have one system that covers all of that stuff I just mentioned. I don't know about that. It could be point solutions. I think it'll be different for everyone. I think maybe the better way to think about it is what's not going to change. What do I think actually the current trajectory is not for this set of activities to go away anytime soon. And the way that I think about that is actually that much as AI will replace some of the tasks that a current recruiter does and a future recruiter won't, the core of what a recruiter is responsible for, which is identifying, motivating, persuading, understanding two sets of human beings, the candidates and the hiring organization, most of that context is elicited either through conversation with those people, relationship building with those people, sort of regular touch points with those people, or through broad industry knowledge, maybe within a particular geo or locale, or these sorts of things. Those are really hard to even sort of believe or understand how they would be automated away in future. So I think my main sort of thesis on this would be focus on the things that are about human to human interactions. That's really what's going to stay the same. Whether the other stuff will get automated away through one platform or through multiple different solutions, I don't have a good prediction on at all. I would say it probably is just going to follow the same trend as like other solutions, where you end up with some platforms which then have a lot of applications on top of them for these individual things that different people care about. So that's probably the main way I would think about that. The other is I guess that it's really the people who are attending events like this who are going to determine the shape of that in terms of how are these things adopted. I do think one of the really novel things about AI tools is a lot of the time historically you would have to very much learn how to use the software, and you'd have to adapt your process for the software. Like a CRM or an ATS is a great example of that. Like, make sure you put the interview in this part of the ATS, because otherwise you won't be able to schedule it. And then when you have the notes, make sure you attach it to that event. Like, you have to do it the way that the ATS wants you to do it, or the CRM wants you to do it. Those things are still going to exist. It's just that obviously AI may do some of the sort of the moving data around for you. AI tools tend to be quite different in that you don't really have to change. You can go back to being actually working how you want, and the AI can cover the gaps for you and sort of understand the fuzziness of how you're acting, but this information needs to be over here, or what they really mean is this. Like, how many times have we asked ChatGPT a question, and when you read it back, you're like, I don't know how it understood what I was getting at there, because that was not a clear question at all. But it has this ability to sort of infer and reason. So I think that's going to be a really big change for people. And what I think how that relates to your question is essentially the sort of very tool-centric perspective may well change as well. Where you're going to spend your time as a recruiter is maybe still like predominantly in your email, or on the phone, or in Zoom or Teams or whatever it might be. Those are your primary communication tools, and that's what you're going to be responsible for, communication, and the sort of the shuffling around the different systems to make sure like other people are aware of things and whatnot. That's going to be increasingly invisible, I think.
That's very exciting. For some people, it could also be scary, and it would also be interesting to hear or see what people think who are actually now also present. I was just looking at LinkedIn. There are about 100 people connected to this live stream. So guys, feel free to write in the comments, like, what do you feel like? Like, what is it like to be kind of in the trenches and see some of these tools pop up? Because for now, they kind of feel like little helpers here and there, right? A tool that will help us to source candidates. But the question is, will they replace us at all? Probably not. But as you say, Siadhal, it's really exciting to see how they can augment us.
They will. I do think it's like really. I mean, for sure, they're going to replace certain tasks that people do. Like, it wouldn't. That is what technology does, right? It enables you to get more output for less input, and that essentially means it replaces some of the effort that was previously done by human beings. So those tasks, there are tasks that will get disrupted, but I think for the best recruiters who really understand the crux of the job is not sort of shepherding data from one place to another. The crux of the job is, again, what I described, like finding amazing people and convincing them this is the right opportunity for them. Then that is like a really safe place to be. I think it's going to be like an increasingly high leverage job. I think you're going to have more demand almost for those people because every business leader has always said, and I know this to be true because I speak with these folks, that talent and who you have in your company is like the number one most important thing. And much as there can be a little bit of cynicism in maybe the recruiting industry sometimes, that like, hey, do these people really mean this? I know that they do because I speak with them. And I think now that we have this, we're removing a lot of the admin and a lot of the toil from recruiting. Actually, this, finding amazing talent, again, convincing them to join a company, understanding if they are indeed amazing for this role. If you can be expert at that, it's going to be so valuable. So I think it's going to be a great thing.
Interesting. So what are some really cool use cases that you have seen with a tool like Metaview? I mean, you have probably seen internal corporate recruiters use it to screen candidates, maybe agency recruiters. Like, do you see some specific segment of HR professionals adopt these tools?
Yeah, I mean, Metaview mainly is targeted at and mainly used by recruiters, both internal and external. It's really, you can think of it as anyone who spends a lot of time speaking to candidates or hiring managers and taking down the information that they share. Metaview is much better at that than you. And also it enables you to focus on doing a good job at the conversation because our AI is really good at summarizing the main takeaways. So yeah, it's really across the board. On the margins, it differs how people end up using that data, which I can get into use cases. For example, our agency customers, the thing that they love about Metaview, aside from being able to have the better conversation with candidates because they don't have to focus on taking notes, that's uniform across all of our customers. Where they really value Metaview is a lot of the time, of course, they'll be working towards a deadline of submitting a shortlist. Oftentimes you want to speak to a few candidates before you decide who's on the shortlist and who you want to write up your cover sheet on or your summary about. By the time you get to writing up that shortlist, it might have been 2 weeks ago that you spoke to one of these candidates. And so being able to go from memory or go from just whatever notes you managed to take to writing up that cover sheet of why this client should speak to this candidate is really tough. And frankly, people either take a lot of time to do it or they don't, and it's not that good of a summary. Using AI for that is massive. And what we hear from folks is it saves them about 80 to 90% of the time that they spend doing that. And they have a much better quality product as a result. So that's on the agency side. I think that's we love those really tactical use cases. Like, hey, the thing that I put in front of my client, of course, at the end of the day, it's going to be the quality of the candidates that's key. And that's our AI does not do any decision-making. That's going to be your decision. But actually, one of the products along the way is how you represent those candidates, and Metaview can help you with that a lot. It's a really cool use case, and it saves you a ton of time. You can spend more time on BD or more time, getting to know candidates, speaking to more candidates, whatever it might be. On the in-house side, again, same sort of uniform thing around just not having to spend time taking notes. Really, what the recruiters love at in-house is that they can start to see into what's happening to their candidates downstream. So, I'm really excited about this candidate. I thought they were great. From my intake meeting with the hiring manager, I thought that he or she would agree. Turns out the hiring manager says that they think they're no good. And historically, I'd have had really very little I could do to understand what happened there. I just have to go maybe speak to them and say, oh, what was that? What was that about? And get a few flecks of information. Whereas now I can actually dive in and see exactly what happened and either challenge the hiring manager, hey, look, I thought we discussed it was this, and I don't understand why this, and have that conversation, or self-reflect and say, oh yeah, the hiring manager did say this. I didn't ask about this in the right way in my screen. Now I can do better next time and therefore serve them better. So those are these really cool, very tactical, probably not problems that people have top of mind. Like, hey, I'm trying to solve this problem exactly. But actually, when they start to use the product, they realize that AI can help them in these sort of downstream ways that are actually pretty fun.
It's just so cool because a lot of recruiters that I've been in touch with, they also want to kind of level up. They want to become more professional, be perceived as the experts. And this could be one of the ways, right? They are able to kind of follow up on what someone said a week ago or a month ago. Very cool, very cool.
Yeah.
We have, by the way, one question from Kalpesh, who is asking, how can AI help us find out early if someone might not be the right fit for our company, so we can avoid having to let them go later? That's a great question.
Yeah, cool. I've seen some interesting things in this space around It depends how early you're talking about, of course. Like, you could have asynchronous interviews where you do have AIs that can give recommendations on whether you should spend more time with this person. I can't speak to the effectiveness or the accuracy of those products. We don't personally do that for our own hiring, for example. And to be clear, Metaview doesn't do this. The Calpush's question, Metaview doesn't do. I still have opinions on it, which I'll share, but Metaview does not do whether this person is the right fit or not, because we think that the technology is not mature enough, basically. So I would sort of advise against this as a focus for you, even as someone who's thinking about the software, mainly because it's really easy for an AI to give you an answer. Yes, this person is not a good fit, or yes, this person is a good fit. And you're only going to know if it was correct 6 or 12 months later. And by that point, a whole bunch of other stuff will have happened, and you might not be sort of, it might have been actually the AI was right and you just managed them poorly. And the management, it's so opaque and so cloudy that I think it's a really dangerous world to get into. Unless you're talking in like very transactional hiring where maybe their success is really clear based on a really measurable number, then that might be more fertile ground for this type of an innovation. The way I would think about AI is less about helping me identify if this person is correct, more about how can it give me more space to be more confident in my judgment about this candidate, rather than sort of rushing around and, struggling to speak to enough people and then just hiring the last person on the list because we're desperate. And another way to think about it would be, one thing that AI is going to change for you is your ability to detect issues. What I mean by that is, a classic agency might be detecting, well, what's our pass-through rate? What are the number of candidates how many candidates do I need to pass on to a client in order to be confident that they're going to hire one of them? Or in the in-house case, it might be the offer acceptance rates, or just stage conversion rates that will help you understand the effectiveness of your recruiting team. Those metrics are going to matter, but I think we'll increasingly see those as trailing metrics. You only know you've done a good job or bad job when it's too late. What AI is going to enable us today is detect things further upstream. Like, for example, things that were talked about during the first call tend to correlate with this candidate, not actually going on to accept an offer because maybe they asked this set of questions that we start to understand are connected to actually not being that pumped about a certain role. So I think detection, it will be useful for detection of certain issues, but in terms of actually identifying the right person, right now I'm not a proponent of that. I think there's a lot of work. I think there's a lot of work to be done to prove that AI can do that reliably at scale.
Awesome, cool. And that actually brings us to another question. This one is from YouTube. So Rupal is asking, can you specify which AI to use for the same? So I guess that's, that came about 30 seconds ago. So it could be relevant to the evaluation of candidates.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't fully understand the question, so I'm not going to be able to. I don't know exactly what part of what I was saying that relates to, so I can't say.
Okay, so maybe we can ask Rupal to kind of restate the question just to get more clarity about what does he mean. But also we have some other comment, great points from Yuri, awesome. And there is a longer question also from LinkedIn. Unfortunately or luckily, the result of a 5-candidate Boolean AI search is not 100% client satisfaction and 100% selection of at least one of them. We are left needing to track signals so that we don't blush at a candidate who is lovely on the CV, and it continues, but not an elementary, not making eye contact when greeting. I agree with you. With a positive view of the impact of AI, we are left with more time for the core communication. I hope so, said the person.
Yeah, so just to obviously it's pretty well put there, but to rephrase, I think that comment draws out a couple of really good examples of some things that, listen, I'm not saying we couldn't train an AI to identify whether this person is good at making eye contact and these sorts of things, or their body language. I don't think like that's impossible. Like, nothing's impossible, but there's just going to be this massive long tail of things that we think we know are going to be important to this hiring manager, or given the market, where the market's at, this is actually a good thing or a bad thing, or we can do better. We're really lucky to have this. But all of those things are going to be what separates the great recruiter. And those are some examples, like things like eye contact, and do I think this person will gel well with this hiring manager, given they're just coming off a bad quarter. Are they going to be really looking for this type of like a shark salesperson? There's all this stuff that's just like so like the real gold of recruiting is understanding this context and helping people solve that problem. That I think is going to be where it's going to be super super fun to spend more time on that stuff.
Yeah, cool. And meanwhile, Rupal added a comment about the evaluation, and this is just coming back to the question, can you specify which AI to use? I will probably just mention, Rupal, there was another interview that we recorded on this podcast about Tech Screen, which was a tool to actually evaluate candidates, especially on the technical skills. Also, it's thin line because, how can really evaluate? The tool was more about kind of creating a summary of technical skills based on what the candidate said, but it's thin line. So just a quick follow up on this.
Yeah, it seems like maybe they're getting at which AI can you use for like async screen evaluations. I can't recommend any, but obviously HireView were the original on that. I don't know how they're doing from what they're applying from an AI perspective now, but I've seen one. I think there's like an interviewer.ai. I haven't seen any really break out and heard people say, hey, this is amazing, this has changed the game for me. I just know I'm seeing people play with that, where you literally have like an AI generated avatar conducting the interview. I think that is interesting for certain roles. It's not the type of roles that we focus on, which tend to be more creative, white collar, like non-transactional work. But I think if you're hiring more sort of at volume, and maybe you have a quite predictable, you can be quite predictable about who's going to work out, then I think those can make sense. So yeah, probably best to Google it and find out rather than rely on me.
Awesome. There is another question on LinkedIn by Akil. How do recruiters collaborate with AI tools in the decision-making process?
Yeah, great question, because I think that it's got the word collaborate with AI in it, which I think is exactly the right way. I think that's where we're at right now, and I think that's definitely what we focus on as well, and what we think is the future for definitely the sort of the type of hiring that we help folks with. So one way is very, I would say, ChatGPT-esque, but imagine ChatGPT having access to the same data that you have. What I mean by that is, let's imagine I have done 5 interviews today. And if I went to go and ask ChatGPT now, hey, which of one of those candidates was the one who said X or Y? ChatGPT would say to me, Siadhal, I have no idea what you're talking about. This is not available to me on my data cutoff date, which is only publicly available information anyway. So I can't really collaborate with that AI in decision making because it has no idea about the context that I've experienced. Whereas if I go and speak to another AI that does have that context of those conversations, hey, who was that candidate who said X or Y? I thought that was really great. It can find that information for me. So the at the interaction level, it's very similar. It's just now this AI, it's very similar to what you might experience with ChatGPT. But at the data it has access to, because it's your company data, it can just help you in a far more meaningful way. And in that case, it's just it's almost helping you with recall. It's helping you with your memory. Like I have this faint recollection of this thing, but I can't quite remember what it was. Who was it that said this? Okay, I'll go and check that moment out. Oh yeah, that reminds me. I wanted to follow up with them about this. So that's like a great example of how AI can help you, because it remembers everything that has happened. It can interpret your request, even if it's not very precise. It's not like a search, it's not just looking for keywords. It actually can infer what you're looking at, what you're looking for based on the data it has. And so that's a great example of how it can help you. Another is around using AI to create alerts on your conversations. So for example, say you're in a large agency who are, tend to do a certain type of hiring. Of course, you want to be responsible for sourcing and then sort of placing the candidates. But the reality is you have colleagues who are speaking to other candidates too, who might not be a fit for the rec they're working on, but may well be a fit for the rec that you're currently working on. So if you can tell this AI who's a horizontal, hey, like anytime any of my colleagues speak to someone who has X or Y, they say they're really proficient with Python and are willing to relocate to, to Prague or whatever it might be, let me know, because that might be actually really useful for this other rec I'm working on. That's a really cool use case too. It's not really helping. I guess the decision making is a little bit different there, but it's meaning that you're just getting way more shots on goal at speaking to the right types of candidates without you having to be the one that literally had every single touch point with them. So yeah, there's a really exciting. I wouldn't call it a long tail, because I think we're still talking about in the order of 5 to 10 particular problems that AI is really good at solving for recruiters. That are more like the level that I think the best recruiters are having a lot of success with, the sort of ones I just described there.
Awesome. Now, when you are talking about kind of using information from one discussion to another, I was just kind of thinking about what an awesome experience it could be potentially if this AI was kind of listening to everyone in the company, having discussions with not just candidates, but also hiring managers, because it sometimes happens when you have some recruiter or account manager discussing a potential role with a client or a hiring manager, and then it's just the two people who know about it. But the AI could whisper to someone else, some other recruiter, like, hey, you know what? Your colleague of yours was just discussing last week with another client. I mean, it's just crazy if you think about what could be the potential of AI whispering.
I like that too. I think there's like a really interesting challenges to be solved, obviously around the privacy aspects, like which parts of our data do we want whispered? Because I'm happy for my colleagues to know this versus which parts do I don't. And so those are really important challenges to get right. But still, I think the future you're painting is like a compelling one. Going back to I think it was whose question was it about the collaborating on decisions? Akhil's question. Another really great, very tangible use case we see is, which is really about empowering recruiters, is it can go two ways. It can be, client or hiring manager has some red flags on the candidate that aren't fully substantiated, and you can really easily find that context. Let's say you've spoken to a candidate 3 or 4 times. You can't remember everything you've discussed with them, of course. Hiring manager or client has a concern. You check in with Metaview or whatever you're using, and you find that information in like 5 seconds, and you can either sort of confound their concern, like, don't worry about this, I covered it, look, here's where they talked about it, and you can get that in 5 seconds, not because you're having to like read through all your notes and then, oh yeah, I think they said something about us, I think that'll be fine, don't, and not being convincing. That goes away, and you can be much more convincing based on the real evidence. That's a really great one. And then the other one is just more around similar if you're getting feedback or just even a question from the client, like, do they have X or Y, and being able to help you move that candidate along without having to maybe speak to them again, and maybe you don't have a chance to speak to them, and by the time you do, by the time you they reply to your email, they've accepted a role somewhere else. These are all of the sort of areas of efficiency that I think are more exciting.
Awesome, super cool. Well, it's just exciting. The future is so bright, hopefully, with all these data privacy concerns and everything. But anyway, there is 1 or 2 more questions. Raju asks, how can we reduce time to hire by collaborating with AI?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of the same. I think the biggest killer of time to hire is not getting to a decision on a candidate who actually could have been a fit. So I think a lot of the decision making and time to hire things actually overlap, which I think is a really cool thing about the interviewing portion sort of section of your hiring pipeline, is actually quality and efficiency. They're actually quite tightly wound. A lot of the time in other parts of work, they're sort of separate. I'm either going to do this fast or I'm going to do it high quality. The fact is, with interviewing, you're spending an hour or 2 hours or 6 hours, 7 hours, however long you spend with a candidate together. That time is not going to change. The quality of those interactions are what going to determine your efficiency, because it's going to determine whether they accept the offer or not, or whether you identify the right person, and whether you're able to get to the end of the process and actually make an offer from a position of confidence. So basically, that saves me sort of repeating all of the decision making things. Specifically around reducing time to hire, I think there's probably more to be done there. One is that literally some of the work, I don't know about, obviously, and it would be interesting in folks' comments. A lot of the time, the recruiters that I speak to will say that after a call with a candidate, they will spend somewhere in the order of magnitude of 20 to 30 minutes, maybe not right after, maybe later in the evening, writing up their notes. And that is just time that you don't get back, and that is the time that you can't spend on other things, maybe speaking to other more qualified candidates, or refining your search based on what you learned, because you realize this thing actually isn't right. So that's a big way, is literally just by actually accepting this, what is quite scary prospect of AI starting to do some of the things that I used to think I was good at, but then flipping it sort of in your head to, well, what can I now do with that time that separates me and makes me a better recruiter, is certainly one. Again, I think a lot of this relates to the decision making again, but the creation of those alerts, this is all going to be user generated. So it's going to be you telling your AI, I mean, just to be clear, you can already do this in Metaview, for example. Alert me about these things. Alert me about every time I have an interview with a candidate and they mention these 3 things, but I only asked this many questions and I didn't cover this topic. You know, all of these sorts of things that you might going to find it very hard to track yourself because you're in the guts of doing your work. Your AI can actually track for you based on your instructions. And this is what I mean about it being really flexible. It's yours. These are very personal systems, especially the most powerful ones are going to be very personal to you. So if you just let it know, hey, tell me about every time this thing happens, alert me every time I do X or Y, or someone else in my company does, Z, that's how you're going to get your efficiency. And if your focus is on reducing time to hire, then you'll come up with the instructions that you're interested in, that you have a hypothesis are going to help you speed up your hiring. If you're focused on quality, you'll have a different set of hypothesis that you'll ask for data around. And I don't mean data again in a spreadsheet way. I just mean, again, like, tell me when this thing happens, because I'll be more informed and I'll be able to act accordingly.
On this note, there was one use case that you mentioned before we started recording. It was regarding sourcing candidates, like how to use some of the notes from previous discussions with candidates. So maybe this could also help to reduce the time to hire, right? If you can find candidates faster thanks to the notes from before.
Yeah. Thanks for the reminder. We're seeing that more and more as well. Just to expand on it a little bit, if you fast forward to a world where, or if you just imagine you are someone who has been capturing the actual interviews for the last year, let's say. Obviously, most of the candidates you speak to in part of your day-to-day, you don't end up placing. That doesn't mean they're bad candidates. It just means they weren't a good fit for the rec you were working on at the time. And of course, now you've got a new rec. And what's the first thing you do? Well, at the moment, you might spend a bit of time you'll spend a bit of time obviously looking at your current database, but the database won't have all of the sort of the rich detail you might need for this very particular or an exotic rec you're now working on. Whereas if you're in a world where actually the first place you go when you're sourcing is to my database, and I don't care what it says on their LinkedIn profile, I don't care what it says on their resume, I care about the proprietary data I have as a recruiting firm about this set of candidates. And if you're sourcing for, I don't know, a software engineer in that's willing to relocate to Hungary and is proficient in certain languages and can speak Hungarian, you probably didn't conduct the interview in that language for most people that aren't Hungarian recruiters, but it might have come up amongst one or two of those folks, and those can be just incredibly valuable. They can help you shortcut a whole search. If you can find, did any of my candidates I've spoken to who are proficient in Python mention that they're also fluent in Hungarian, and like we just pop up those two or three profiles who satisfy that, that's a game changer. Whereas you probably didn't capture that in your notes, but Metaview captured it, even if it happened a year ago. So that's a really cool way to sort of accelerate your sourcing and accelerate your shortlist creation, I guess, is one way to think about it.
Very cool. Now, just when you mentioned, I realized what a cool way it will be to have interviews in the local language, for example, in Hungarian or German or whatever, and then the AI automatically translates it and enables everyone in the company to see notes in English. Well, that's really a game changer. Awesome. We have some more comments from Boyan. So let's start with the first one. Boyan asks, how can AI screen direct applicants and create suitable shortlists for you overnight to call next day for a preliminary recruiter discussion? That's a great question.
Yeah, it's a great question. Not one that I personally am super have a great answer for. I guess interesting what they mean by screen, what Boyan means by screen. Do you mean like, elicit information via a conversation, or do we mean source? Yeah, so I think there are AI sourcing tools that I've seen that are interesting. I know Gem recently released an AI sourcing assistant. I haven't heard any reviews yet, but they're a great company, so I wouldn't be surprised if they've done a good job. There was another, I think Recruiter Flow had an interesting credit system where you can use their AI to source based on obviously whatever information you give it, and you only pay based on people that you decide you want to speak to. I don't know if it handles the part which is convincing that candidate to speak to you, of course, but I think there's an interesting system that you could imagine there, where again the AI is essentially what Boyan is saying. I think it's a great question. I think let me say this. I think what Boyan, the future that Boyan is trying to create is a good future. the part of the question that's impossible to answer, or not impossible, but we're never going to answer it with a few sentences, is how. I don't know how, but that's exactly now's the time for some smart people to go and figure that out.
Yeah, but it's so interesting that there are all these different tools popping up to cover the whole workflow of a recruiter. There are some AI tools to do the sourcing, as Bojan kind of suggests with the question. Then there are some other tools like Metaview to take care of the screening part. So it's kind of interesting also to think about what's the future of recruiting. It could really be kind of the automated screening, sourcing of the candidates, and then I could envision a recruiter just being connected on Zoom the whole day, and then the AI will just, fill in the calendar with pre-screened, pre-qualified prospects, and then the recruiter will be just kind of talking the whole day, probably. I don't know. It was just an idea now, based on what we are discussing. But Bojan had also another question: how do integrations of Metaview work with Zoho Recruit or Odoo or Bamboo?
So we have a live integration with Bamboo, Zoho Recruit, and Odoo not yet, but we essentially do these on a regular basis. We have like a regular sprint on integration. So if that's if that's a priority for customers, we build them, but haven't done those yet.
Yeah, there was also a follow-up question or comment: API call integrations with the current ATS in place. I guess that's referring to Metaview.
Yeah, we have lots. So a lot of the in-house, sort of predominantly in-house ATSs like Greenhouse, Lever, Smart Recruiters, Workable, these folks, but then also a lot of the agency CRMs like Bullhorn and Recruiter Flow we recently launched a deeper integration with. So worth checking out those guys if you're curious. There's a few others as well. Somewhat escaped me, but yeah.
Awesome. And how it works, let's say in case a recruiter is on a call with a candidate and AI is taking notes, can the recruiter then share the notes with other people involved in the hiring process? Let's say in a different company, for example, with a client in the staffing agency, it's a different company. So can the notes be shared? Like, can it be shared automatically? Is some additional approval needed? How it works?
Yes, it can be shared automatically. No additional approval is needed. So essentially the way, don't want to go too deep down the sort of data privacy regulations, but essentially if you're your company, if you adopt Metaview, your company will have a sort of a data privacy posture that will enable certain features at the user level. Then it matters at the user level, because as a user of this product, or if you're getting recorded at any time by anything, you're what's called a data subject. And as a subject, you have certain rights as well: right to delete things, right to access things, and all these sorts of things. So if you're one of the people who is the data subject and you have the permissions, that your company has granted you the permissions, then you can share your interview with other people as well. And that will all be baked into what the candidate is essentially opting into as part of the call in the first place.
Okay, and some people may also wonder whether it works with Zoom or Google Meet or Microsoft Teams. So does it work like some of the other AI tools when like a person, but it's not a person, but it looks like another participant on the call is joining? Or is it like a completely different standalone tool that people need to install and use a standalone?
Oh, no. Yeah, you use your existing tools. You can think of Metaview as an assistant that follows you around. So if you use Google Meet, Zoom, if you use your phone, if you use Teams, if you use WebEx, it sort of doesn't matter. Metaview essentially has a bunch of ways of making sure it's there as well. So yeah, you don't have to change your flow.
Wonderful. There is another question from Camila related to the productivity in recruiting. If you could suggest some AI tools that help to screen resumes.
Sorry to not be as helpful as maybe I should be on this one, but I don't know any that I've heard especially great things about, so I can't help you. That doesn't mean that there aren't good ones. I just don't personally know.
Yeah, from what I've heard, that there are pretty much all of these bigger applicant tracking systems now implement some form of resume screening. So I guess Camila, you can just choose one of those applicant tracking systems and explore this further. Awesome, cool. Guys, feel free to ask questions. There was one more note, Sale, before we were discussing this. Before we kicked off the call, preparing candidate brief. So the tool obviously can be used to evaluate a candidate when he or she is on a call, but even to prepare the brief for the candidate with some digest, with some highlights. So how it works? How can a recruiter save those 20 minutes, which usually takes to prepare the screening report?
Yeah, so Metaview is very finely tuned for the most important recruiting conversations. Now, a lot of that is interviews, and obviously what the output of an interview a lot of the time is, as well as data you put in your CRM, it's also some information that you've designed to send to your client. And obviously our AI does not know how to, we have a very good, our default is very good in terms of a summary of a candidate, but where you get really magical is when you instruct our AI how you want your summaries to be. So what that results in is you just have a sort of an interaction with our AI saying, these are the topics that matter most. So like upweight this and put it here. And I want this bit as a table and I want this bit to be bullet points, but then I want my summary to be, a paragraph. You can literally sort of tell your AI based on a few examples that you give it exactly how you want your notes every time. And then as soon as you finish, you'll just have that there waiting for you. And it's editable because, of course, you are still, one of the things I forgot to mention earlier is one of the things I don't think is going away is that you as recruiters are still going, and anyone in any line of work are still going to be accountable for your actions. You might have AI assist you in getting to a certain point within that, but in terms of like the candidates you're putting in front of clients, you're accountable for that. How you're presenting those candidates, you're accountable for that. It's just hopefully AI can help you more and more. So yeah, you can instruct the AI exactly how you want these summaries or these briefs. And then it will just have that ready for you literally like a minute after every call, ready for you to just put the finishing touches to, or, add that personal sort of flair to. Works really well for that. Also works really well for intake meetings. So when you're having the meeting with the client and they're explaining what they're looking for, being able to play back to them almost like right away after the meeting, hey, this is what we heard. This is what we think we're looking for, is really helpful too, because you just shorten those feedback loops with them rather than, again, having that meeting, getting to maybe the end of the next day before you get a chance to consolidate that and share it with them, only for them to get back to you and say, no, I didn't mean this, I meant that, and it slows down the search. So there are loads of cases where having a well-tuned AI, an AI that we've initially tuned and then you as the user have configured so you're like maximally efficient, really pays back.
It's just really mind-blowing. Just imagine we would have this discussion 15 years ago. Everyone would be laughing. I mean, that's not possible. I mean, and people still a year ago, I mean, even my colleagues a year ago, they were taking notes after the interview. So the interview took, for example, 45 minutes, and then they spent another 20, 25, sometimes even 30 minutes writing down notes, re-listening to Otter AI or some other tool, that was capturing the audio. And writing the report, and now it could be done pretty much in an instant after the screening call. So just if you think about the productivity gain, it's really mind-blowing, especially if you multiply it by number of calls per week and the number of weeks in a year. It's really crazy. Awesome. There is one more question from Anatoly, who oh well, thanks a lot, Anatoly, for the tip. That's super appreciated. And it comes with a question: are you using free sourcing tools like MiraJobs?
We're not using them for our sourcing. We tend to be pretty actually LinkedIn heavy on how we go about sourcing.
Awesome. Cool. And Kalpesh is asking, is it possible to use AI to predict the likelihood of a candidate being hired?
Another really good question. I think that will, no, I've not seen anything great right now. That's the type of area that we are interested in exploring. I think the way that it will go first of all is less, hey, this is the AI's prediction of how good or how suitable this person is. I think it will go more towards, I think someone will, don't get me wrong, I think some people will try that. I think the question will be, is it actually accurate? That, we'll have to figure out, and some people are going to have to learn the hard way, unfortunately. I think the more sort of undoubtedly helpful way to go initially is, hey, it looks like you're about to make this decision on this candidate, but let me just re-up this piece of information because I think you may have missed it, that I think is really important because it's very similar to someone who you thought was a great candidate. Do you know what I mean? That type of thing where it's more focused on helping you feel more confident about your decision. in a way that doesn't require you to go through, hours and hours of interviews, because you're not going to do that. So I think it's more about ways that we can identify, or AI can identify, the most important nuggets from hours and hours of conversations to help you make a better decision, which does obviously require some prediction. It's like, is the AI is predicting which parts of this do I think will be most important to Michael in his decision. So I still think that's still a real game changer if you can get that right, but it's a little bit lower stakes than this person's great, you should hire them. And then obviously Kalpesh would still be responsible for that decision and would have to suffer the consequence, because the AI isn't going to, get fired.
Awesome. Well, it's kind of interesting now to think about the different interests and motivations, because I can imagine someone like Kalpesh or even me, we just want to go after some quick wins, just, hey, can I get this AI to tell me what to do? Should I pass this candidate further, or should I just send him a rejection letter?
Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah. But then what does it feel like for someone like you who is creating the tool? Because eventually I'm not saying you will be responsible, but to some extent, I guess you would feel some sense of responsibility, right? Like if you develop the AI to guide the end user to take some decisions, then also there is some sense of responsibility on your shoulders, I guess. Like that's kind of a question, like what is this like to develop these tools? Like how do you think about this responsibility?
Yeah. So I think the responsibility that we have, that we think when we think about all of this, but the really important one is that we put a lot of guardrails. We fine tune our AI to have a lot of guardrails, not to make actual hiring suggestions. So that's one part. But of course, that doesn't fully satisfy your question. The other part is, well, you still might be influencing the decision by the things that you're raising as like highlights or whatever. One thing is, we don't actually do that right now, to be clear. It's just something we think about being able to do soon. The way that we tend to get feedback into the quality of the suggestions our AI is making is not through our judgment, like the people in this office, of like, hey, this is a good decision, bad decision. It's always very ChatGPT-esque. Everything has some micro feedback from the user, like thumbs up, thumb down, was this a useful suggestion or not? And so that's really the way that you end up training these models to get better and better, is through the user feedback. Because again, what we're trying to do is augment the user. If we can do things that they are saying they're helpful, we'll do more of that. If users saying that's not helpful, we'll do less of it. That is, this is what I mean by it's really the people that are on webinars like this who are going to determine the way these products go, because it's the early adopters who are going to be really the ones whose feedback is most weighted in how we build out these products. So it's really going to be based on those interactions. So we take that very seriously. We're here to supercharge and augment recruiters. If recruiters tell us that this is helping them do a better job, we'll build more of that thing. If the recruiters are wrong about what's helping them, then I guess that will be a problem. But I don't think that's the way it's going to go.
Wonderful. Cool. So guys, if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat now on YouTube and on LinkedIn, because we are kind of running out of time that we have allocated to this wonderful webinar, and we heard lots of great insights from Siadhal. So there is an opportunity for one last question. And before we wrap it up, Siadhal, what do you think kind of should someone who is now entering the recruiting space do? Because there are some veteran recruiters who obviously, they have some experience and they may have some background, but then there are juniors who may be a bit overwhelmed with everything that is going on. There are tools that haven't been here a year ago. They may not know whether to focus on sourcing, which a year or 2 years ago, that was a recommended career path. Hey, why don't you start with sourcing? But now it may not be the best career path anymore, because there are all these tools. So what should someone who is just starting the career do with all of these AI tools?
Well, I think on the sourcing point, there's so many tools now. I still think the human touch will be really important, and I think it will just change where you get your alpha. At the end of the day, if every company completely outsources all of their recruiting to AI, that is possible, but then there'll be no one with any advantage. So therefore it won't happen. If you're a great company, you'll say, okay, great, we've got these AI systems in place. How can I sort of really intelligently apply humans to this to give us some alpha, to give us an advantage over our competitors? And I think that will happen in sourcing. I think that will happen in recruiting. I think will happen in how you hire and manage people as well. So I just think that's like if it's not like that, then the world has really fundamentally changed, and there's going to be no work for any humans, and we're in a completely different sort of like completely different world, and that's not the one we're building for, obviously. So I still think that can be I still think sort of starting and sourcing makes sense for the people who sort of excel at that type of work. I think if you're maybe someone who excels more at the I guess the human to human interactions, and almost this, maybe you've got sort of either you may have studied, or you have like a passion for human psychology, or you're really passionate maybe about the market that you're recruiting within, and you sort of read all the industry news, and so you really understand, you can have great high signal conversations with candidates. That I think is where I guess if I was going to make a recommendation, that's where I would sort of say to spend your time. Like, really, where can you get expert, both in terms of an industry, a geo, although geo is obviously less relevant with more remote hiring, but it still matters in many cases, or in terms of like understanding human nature and sort of like this matchmaking. And if you can get really respected for that, it's really hard to design, like educate someone, top down about how to do that. If you think you have a knack for that and you can really lean into it, then I think that's a really solid way to try and sort of direct your career. But again, I don't think that's everyone. I think you can still be a really powerful influence to your recruiting quality and efficiency by, building the right systems, building the right process, and doing that informed by a lot of the data that these AI systems are now affording to you. So I still think there's a ton of routes people can go. Depends on their personal strengths.
Yeah, well, it's a great suggestion to niche down and become the expert, become the consultant, add some value in the process. That's a great one. All right, cool. So it looks like we are out of questions on LinkedIn and YouTube. So then I guess we can wrap it up. The timing is great, Siadhal. If there is nothing else that you would like to mention besides probably where can people learn more about you and how they can use the tool Metaview, is there any kind of free trial that they could try?
Yeah, totally. Actually, one of the things I definitely recommend is it's a new dawn for a lot of these products. So you should definitely play with things first. Don't sort of feel like you need to make a big decision about which AI tools to adopt. Take things for a spin first. So yeah, if you are interested in Metaview, great. Head over to the website metaview.ai, try it for free, or you can get in touch with one of the team via the website, and they can take you for a demo. If you're just more interested in sort of the sort of the movement of AI and TA as a whole, I would say either connect with me on LinkedIn. I sort of post about it pretty regularly, and I think I've got interesting opinions. Or if you can also follow Metaview's account, which talks a bit about Metaview, but also talks about broader trends as well on LinkedIn. So those are probably the three that I'd recommend.
Awesome. And I'll paste the link also in the chat. I'm using my wife's account.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, that's me. So feel free, guys, to try it out, both Metaview and connect with Siadhal on LinkedIn. Cool. So thanks for joining. Thanks for sharing all these insights and tips on how to not just increase productivity, but feels like double or triple the productivity. Just coming, connecting with connecting the dots regarding the candidate reports and briefs and everything. It's just really mind-blowing how much time a recruiter can gain by using these tools. So yeah, thanks again. It was very productive and helpful.
Totally. Thanks so much, Michael. Really appreciate it. Great to chat with you.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a good day, and see you guys on YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook and everywhere where you are connecting from.